I bet if I say the beginning of this saying, most of you can finish it. There is nothing certain but
Death and taxes.
Death and taxes. We hear that quite a lot, but I'm not so sure it actually hits the mark, because I think there's something that's even more certain, or at least as certain. If anything is certain, I think it's change. We can guarantee that change is going to happen. Change comes to all of us. It's inevitable. I think I'm going to make a new bumper sticker called Change Happens. We'll just pass that out. The other one's been banned for a while now, so we'll just do Change Happens. I think it's accurate. Change is all around us. Change happens in us. Change happens to us. And like it or not, the world is changing, right? But it's not necessarily a bad thing. At the heart of the gospel message is change. Changed minds, changed hearts, changed lives. So today we are beginning a new sermon series called Changed for Good. During the series, we're going to do our best to listen to God and to follow in Jesus' way so that our lives might not only be changed, but changed for good. We begin perhaps in the weirdest place, Ezekiel. Ezekiel 1 and 2, and today I'm doing just selections from 1 and 2. I invite you to go back and read all of 1 and 2. It's a fascinating read, but you're going to get just the bare highlights this morning. You'll see in your Grow, Pray, Study Guide. And by the way, I know the sermon says in your GPS, signing in a strange land. It's singing in a strange land is the name of the sermon. If you know how to sign, you can also sign and sing. I know how to sign a song. I know a song called I See the Morning Breaking Through the Valleys and the Hills. I won't sing it for you, but I can sign it anytime you want. But the title of the sermon is Singing in a Strange Land. And our text comes from Ezekiel 1 and 2. In the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the river Chebar, the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. On the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, and the word of the Lord came to the priest Ezekiel, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians, by the river Chebar. And the hand of the Lord was on him there. As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north, a great cloud with brightness around it and fire flashing forth continually. And in the middle of the fire was something like gleaming amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures, like the rainbow in a cloud on a rainy day. Such was the appearance of the splendor all around. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of someone. He said to me, O mortal, stand up on your feet, and I will speak to you. And when he spoke to me, a spirit entered into me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Oh, change, right? A word that some of us look forward to. Some of us kind of like change, and the others of us really, really hate it. But even for those of us who look for change, there is change, and then there is change, right? It's one thing when change comes and it's something that you've sought out, like deciding to get a new hairstyle, or changing your diet, or exercising more, or changing an old habit. Not that those are always easy or fun, but you've decided to do that and make a commitment to that change. That's one kind of change, but then there is change. Change, the kind you didn't expect, the kind that was thrust upon you, the kind that you didn't see coming, you didn't ask for, and you don't have a clue as how to deal with. You know that kind of change, I'm sure, the kind of change that knocks you off your feet and untethers you from your grounding and then moves you out into some kind of foreign territory where you don't have a map. You don't know how to navigate in this new place that you've landed. When I was a youth minister, there was a family in our church who had a 6th grade son, and during the school year in the winter, when every kid gets sick, eventually he got a cough. And his mom took him to the pediatrician, and they did x-rays, and he had a mass the size of a softball in his chest. He just went to the doctor for a cough. It was aggressive cancer. They were thrust into a foreign land of drug treatments and therapies and long hospital stays in Birmingham, away from their home and their family and their friends and their network. How could they navigate this foreign terrain? Who would they call on for help? The question for that family, and I think, the question for all of us when dislocating change comes is, can we hold on to our understanding of God's abiding presence, God's constant presence with us when we are out in foreign territory? We don't know what's going on around us when the earth seems to be shattering from under our feet. I remember teaching Celia a song when she was in preschool. It was a song about how even though you can't see God, that God is watching over you. And I taught it to her, and we would sing it together before she went to sleep each night so that she wouldn't be afraid of the darkness. But I knew that there would come a day in her life, like that day comes for all of us, I imagine, a day that would come where something big would happen, and I could only hope that I had taught her enough about God, that she had learned enough from her church upbringing to know that she would be able to endure tough times. It's a question that I think most ministers wrestle with. Are we helping people have faith that will endure during the hardest, darkest, scariest times in life? Because let's face it, it's easy to feel God's presence in the good times, right? It's easy to look around in joy and say, I can see that God is doing this work in my presence and in my life. But when everything you've known is suddenly gone, how do you know that God is there? That God is with you? Fred Craddock once told a story about learning in Sunday school. A whole year when he was maybe 4th or 5th grade, his Sunday school teacher spent the entire year teaching their Sunday school class the ABCs of Scripture. And they had to go through the Bible and choose Scripture passages that started with each letter of the alphabet and memorize them. And then say them out loud to each other in class. A, as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And B, be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. C, consider the lilies of the field. And D, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. All the way down to Zacchaeus, which is the obvious Z, I suppose. And he told the story by saying that he thought it was just a ridiculous thing. When he got up into middle school, he thought, why didn't she do that for us? It's just kind of a silly thing she had us do because she didn't know what else to teach us. But he said there came a day in his life when he realized that his Sunday school teacher had taught them to eat the Scriptures. She had taught them to take in those Scriptures, those words that were holy so that they would be internal. They would live inside of him so that when he needed them, God's abiding presence would be inside and he could pull it out, even in a strange foreign land. And this brings us to Ezekiel. We don't know anything about the prophet Ezekiel except for what we have in the book, Ezekiel in the Bible. And let me tell you, if you haven't read it, it is a weird, fascinating book. There's strange visions and hallucinations. There's images of wild creatures and of creeping things. And he seems to be fascinated with blood and even feces. And rabbis used to say you shouldn't be allowed to read Ezekiel till you're 30. It's that kind of book. If there was a movie about it, it couldn't even get an R rating. But I think there is something in Ezekiel for us today. There are some things, however, I think we need to know first, because Ezekiel's not a book that we dwell on very much. So here are some things that you need to know. The first thing to know about Ezekiel is that his profession is that he's a priest. He's a priest, and so he has been all his life, he's grown up and become a priest to be in charge of keeping the temple regulations. In Jerusalem, people come to the temple and they come to make their sacrifice to God, and it is Ezekiel who makes sure that all the regulations are followed, like they are given to the people in the Levitical codes. He is the one that's going to make sure that what has been established is going to be practiced. That they aren't going to just decide one year to do something totally different this year. Let's just change the order of worship. No, it's going to always be the same. And he takes that job as a priest very seriously. Another thing to know is that for Ezekiel and his contemporaries, faith in God is wrapped up in geography. It's wrapped up in location. God is in the temple. That is where God dwells. And if you want to find God, then you go to the temple. Some of you have probably heard me say before that God lives at the beach. I say that quite often. God lives at the beach. And you know why I say that, and Carolyn's nodding. It's because when I go to the beach, I feel God's presence there so easily. Is there a place that you can think of, a geographical place that you just, when you're there, you just feel God's presence? I'm asking for real. Mountains for some.
Right here.
Right here in this place. Camp.
Above the clouds.
Above the clouds. There are places where it's easy to feel God's presence. And since you mentioned camp, I remember, and I know several of you do too, that when several years ago in this region we made the decision to move youth camps and women's camps too, from Hargis to Camp Chandler in Montgomery or close to Montgomery, I can tell you that the youth went absolutely ballistic. The teenagers who were all like, church people don't like change. Why are they so stuck in their ways? Every one of those youth went completely ballistic. We cannot move camp. We must stay at Hargis. Hargis is holy ground. This is where God is. God is here. We can't move there. For Ezekiel, it was like moving from Hargis to Chandler times 1,000,000. God is here in the temple. God is not there. God is here. If we want to be in the presence of God, we have to come here. God doesn't go to us. But it turns out that Ezekiel ends up there. Ezekiel is there, not here. Because Nebuchadnezzar has laid siege to Jerusalem, and he has devastated the city. It's 597 BC, and they looted the temple, and then they just completely destroyed it. And he took the king and and the officials and the soldiers and the skilled laborers and the priests. And he sent them to Babylon, to a foreign land, a land of different gods. They've been exiled. They're in captivity. They've been sent to the Chebar River, which in the opening of Ezekiel, opening of this book, that's where we find him. Faith is wrapped up in geography. God is in the temple, but Ezekiel and the Israelites, they are by the river of Babylon. He had been given his life. He had been giving, his whole life to the rituals of the temple and to the worship of God. And now the temple is gone, and the rituals are gone, and the family is gone, and home is gone, and his job is gone. And if the temple is gone, then so is God, so is faith, so is trust, so is belief. And yet, in our reading, there by the banks of the river, God comes to Ezekiel. In the 13th month, in the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, I was among the exiles by the river Chebar. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. When everything is taken away, still God remains. Ezekiel couldn't even stand up on his own. If you notice that in the reading, he falls on his face, but the Spirit enters him and lifts him up to his feet. Everything else is gone, and yet God remains. In chapter 3, if you go on this week, and I hope you will, to read chapter 3, God tells Ezekiel to eat. And what does he tell him to eat? Eat this scroll. Eat this scroll and fill your stomach with it. And when I ate, says Ezekiel, my mouth was filled with the sweetness of honey. I bet Fred Craddock's Sunday school teacher had been reading Ezekiel when she had them do that practice that whole year in Sunday school. There in a foreign land, God has shown up to Ezekiel. Unexpectedly, God shows up and gives him food to eat, nourishment that will remind him who he is and whose he is. You see that it turns out that God is not only here. God is not only like in the temple or here in this sanctuary or at Harvest or at the beach or wherever it is that God's presence feels easiest. God is also there. It is out there in the foreign lands that we walk in life, those dark places where we find ourselves when all seems lost, when we don't know which way to turn, when we can't even see our way around the next corner. God is there. Barbara Brown Taylor is an amazing author and preacher, and she has a book that I would commend to you called Learning to Walk in the Dark. It's lessons that she's learned in the darkness, times when she suffered with depression and despair in her life. And she says in the book that our eyes aren't good at seeing in the dark. We're not used to looking in the dark because we prefer the light. So it takes practice, holy practice, for people of faith to recognize God in the dark. She recounts the story in the Old Testament of Jacob wrestling all night with God. Maybe you know that story where Jacob doesn't let go and wrestles. And she says this in her book: who would stick around to wrestle with the dark angel all night long if there were any chance that you could escape? The only answer I can think of is this: it's someone in deep need of a blessing. Someone willing to live forever for the blessing that follows the wound. I have learned things in the dark, she says, that I could never have learned in the light. I have learned that new life is born in the darkness. As many years as I've been listening to Easter sermons, I have never heard anyone talk about the dark part. Resurrection is always announced with Easter lilies and the sounds of trumpets and bright streaming light, but it did not happen that way. If it happened in a cave, it happened in complete silence, and it happened in absolute darkness, with the smell of damp stone and dug earth. Sitting in the heart of my darkest cave, she writes, I let this sink in. New life starts in the dark. Whether it's a seed in the ground or a baby in the womb or Jesus in the tomb, it starts in the dark, and God is always there. I wonder if it was dark when the psalmist wrote what Jack read for us this morning as our call to worship. By the rivers of Babylon we sat down, and there we wept. For how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? But you know what a psalm is? It's a song. I imagine the people gathered together singing those very words. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? It's like Dory. It's like Dory. What does she say when she's not sure where to go next? Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim. We are people of faith, and sometimes we are out in a foreign place where we don't know how to navigate. But what do? We sing. We sing songs of faith, and we worship, and we wrestle even. Darkness comes. Foreign territory is known to us. Illness, loss of family, times when we become the parents of our parents, when the empty nest comes, when we lose things that are comfortable and secure in our lives, when everything we know is taken away, still, God remains. In the 13th year, in the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, I was among the exiles by the river, and the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. God came to Ezekiel in a foreign land. God is the one who picked him up, and God is the one who gave him a new kind of life. Was it the same as before? No, but it was a new life. When you find yourself in a foreign land, and all that you know is gone, expect a vision of God. Expect God to show up in your place, wherever that is. And you might have to put on your night vision goggles, because we're not good at looking for God in the night, but look, practice it. Even in a place that you would not expect God to be, God will be there. The 13th year, the 4th month, on the 5th day of the month, while the exiles are by the river, the heavens opened up, and there was a vision of God. And everything else is gone. Still, God remains. May we have the eyes to see it in a song